there have been a number of rigorous studies, randomized controlled trials that tested with a comparison group, a control group, to see whether those that were offered a program actually changed their behavior and had different outcomes. So changing their behavior, meaning, whether they said that they eat better or exercised more
Right.
or took part in like preventative care. And outcomes is like, whether they actually have lost weight or stopped smoking, had a lower risk for a heart attack, which is like a core target of these programs. And also whether they report less absenteeism, higher productivity, and lower health costs.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. So when you think about wellness in the workplace, the topic of wellness programs is discussed quite a bit. Not just the companies who are providing them, but do they actually make a difference improving health outcomes? Pleasure to be joined here in studio by Iwan Barankay, who is an associate professor of business economics and public policy, as well as an associate professor of management here at the Wharton School. Iwan, it's been a while. Great to talk to you again. How are you?
It's wonderful to see you too. Hello.
Thank you. All right. So what are companies trying to bring forward with this idea of bringing in wellness programs in the first place?
Well, I thought that you would give me an easier question first, because there's no single clearly defined structure or approach to this. So there's an overarching concern and motivation behind these programs, but there's no single definition. I think what these wellness programs are all about is some form of a programmatic approach, and with a focus on prevention, with a focus on coaching, to help people to steer towards more healthy behavior, and that is in contrast to other programs that companies have that are more driven by legislation and administrative rules about workplace safety. And I think here the big component here is not just that that's a program that allows people to follow certain steps that are then dedicated towards particular needs of each individual employee. So there's a back and forth between what employees want and what
Right.
they need. And also there's a big data component to it, which is like quite controversial, but people's behavior is being tracked more than before, and the program is tailored towards encouraging them to do that, and sometimes rewards or sometimes punishments are attached to that as well.
So for a lot of the companies, there has to be a financial component tied to this when you're thinking about the cost of healthcare, the way that has gone up in recent years, and the fact that if somebody is not healthier, they're obviously more likely to be spending money to fix or correct certain healthcare issues to begin with.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of workplace wellness programs goes back decades, where we wanted to encourage people to really look after themselves. But there has been a big change with the Affordable Care Act that specifically allowed a big component of cost to be dedicated to these wellness programs. And that was a big change, where now there was a legislative platform on which these programs could be built. Over time, the scenario became a bit more complicated when it came to data protection and disability care. But in general, there's a much more foundation where companies can actually use costs and incentives related to these wellness programs compared to before. And the big question to me still is, when does wellness programs start, and when do like amenities in the workplace end? Amenities being, tools or technologies or equipment that help people be more productive, help companies to attract and retain people, and increase satisfaction in the workplace.
So is the component of that then just something that the company believes that they can have as an add-on, and it is a benefit on top of traditional benefits that employees would have under their benefits package?
Yes, I mean, how does this work inside an organization or a company? I mean, often they invite a consultant to advise them on what to do.
Right.
If it is more sophisticated, they actually do some surveying among the employees to get a sense of what they are looking for, what are their real needs, and then they build a program around that. So say, many times people who have to commute quite a bit, they might find it difficult to go in addition to the work and to be with the duties at home to go to the gym
Right.
or to go for a run. So they might want to see whether there's a gym at the workplace, which by itself is just an amenity, but then whether going to the gym is something that the company rewards or fosters. And here's an interesting additional component. Many times these wellness programs are sought for by future employees as a signal that the company actually cares about them.
Right.
They don't just want to squeeze the maximum productivity out of them, but they really care about whether they're doing well, whether they're happy at the workplace.
Well, and I guess off of that then, when we went through the pandemic, we saw a greater focus on mental health as a component of this.
Yeah, the COVID-19 really accelerated a process whereby companies reevaluate what kind of work needs to be done at home and what can be done remotely. I mean, we now know that Zoom has become a much more mature platform where we can do much more work from remotely.
Right.
Now, with that came an interesting challenge, which is twofold. Before, we could really measure people's behavior much more clearly because they're there in the workplace and we can supervise them. Sometimes this is possible with technology. But when we go remotely, what has happened is many companies now started to use devices of various sorts or other ways of tracking people's behavior. So
Right.
if there's a program that encouraged people to walk more, then companies would give them pedometers or an app that tracks how much they walked. But if it is more reward, how can you actually make sure that they actually did it?
Well, I guess it becomes important then because when COVID was here and we were all working from home every day of the week, I noticed it in my neighborhood, and I'm sure in neighborhoods across the United States and around the world, you saw more people out walking, but it was because they had more time on their hands and they, needed something to do. Now we're kind of back into this normal lifestyle, and I wonder if people will continue to do it as frequently as they did it 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think the data is not quite there yet to tell us what has happened. But yes, it is true. If you didn't have to commute, you had a lot of time that you could dedicate to walking or exercising. But it may also lead to situations where there's a strain on mental health because you're always at home, you're always in the same environment where you live and work, and that is difficult to set boundaries. So there, the shift has become much more towards supporting people with their mental well-being so that they are not burned out or that they just get irritated. Note, if you're working remotely, you are isolated from others.
Right.
So for a while, you can perhaps tolerate, the antics of a supervisor because you think this is still a good company or good career to pursue. But when you reach a burning point or a tipping point, then you may no longer be willing to do that, and then you might quit.
Do enough companies, look at and invest in the types of components to have in a wellness program so that you're getting the greatest benefit? Or is it somewhat that is, as you may have suggested before, kind of thrown out there as a bonus, as a benefit to the employee?
That's a great question. And I think when I read the literature and also look at what companies do, it is often not quite clear what the clear rationale behind these programs are. So if you wanted to step back and be more academic about it, clearly one component is just a human capital theory idea. I invest in their health, people are then healthier, they are not absent, and if they're healthier, then healthcare costs go down. So that's the rationale behind it.
Sure.
But if you sometimes think about employee satisfaction, then companies offer it because they want to make sure that people are happy and that they want to come there. And many times we see that employees, when they consider companies or which companies to go to, they highlight, oh, this company has these programs as well.
Right.
But when we survey them later, whether they actually use it, they often don't have time to use the gym or to make use of their wellness programs because they're too busy working on their careers.
So it mixes in the component of the company wanting to do whatever they can to keep the best employees in the company and going to whatever lengths they need to within reason to be able to do that.
Yes, this has been not just a fad, but there was really like a horse race in the market where companies offered more and more elaborate programs
Yeah.
and signal to them in what comprehensive ways they can really pay attention to them and help them with their careers. And but then when we come to the data and look at who used what and whether it actually made a difference, it becomes a much more nuanced picture.
What do you think needs to occur then moving forward to make sure that we maximize the best components for the employees and for the companies as well?
So I think with this question, we are starting to talk a little bit more about, what lessons can we draw from what companies have offered, and whether these programs actually work. And here, I think it is clear that we need to learn much more about what we can actually do that makes a difference to these employees. There have been a number of rigorous studies, randomized controlled trials that tested with a comparison group, a control group, to see whether those that were offered a program actually changed their behavior and had different outcomes. So changing their behavior, meaning, whether they said that they eat better or exercised more,
Okay.
or took part in like preventative care. And outcomes is like, whether they actually have lost weight or stopped smoking, had a lower risk for a heart attack, which is like a core target of these programs. And also whether they report less absenteeism, higher productivity, and lower health costs. And here, when we look at the two biggest, most prominent studies from these randomized controlled trials, we see that there is slight evidence that the people report and have been shown to change their behavior somewhat, but there's no compelling evidence or no significant evidence in terms of outcomes that we care about, like absenteeism, productivity, healthcare costs, and health risks. So these were for quite comprehensive programs. So to your question, okay, so given that a broad program does not work, are components of them working better?
Right.
So this is where there has been a shift towards identifying specific approaches. One was to work on people's fitness, specifically encouraging them more, either with financial incentives or through other peer pressure or workplace norms, to go to the gym. And we see that those programs increased musculoskeletal strength, and sometimes that translates into productivity, but you can imagine that this is really, really work specific. Another key component of these programs, which is something that I've studied a lot in my own research, was about using financial incentives to specifically target certain behaviors. Econ 101 says that, people are lazy and they don't want to do stuff unless you give them an additional reward for doing it. So you
Right.
have to overcome the inconvenience or the displeasure of doing something. So I've studied whether offering people financial incentives to take their statin medication, which is like for people who are at risk of a heart attack, whether this actually has an impact. And I've done 2 large NIH-funded randomized controlled trials and have replicably shown that those incentives actually have no impact on cholesterol levels. Now, there are some studies that show some benefits, but even the studies that show benefits, the interventions are not cost effective.
Right.
So we are still out on the quest to identify what are the components that work well. Now, the latest candidate for these are really the wellness programs that focus on mental health, because this is what people really say, that they struggle with the stress, they struggle with the motivation. Why should I apply myself? This is really so stressful. And this is a clear candidate where more research has to come about. But again, we lack the evidence that is actually effective at this stage.
But it is still a topic that will continue to be used, researched, looked at, so that we can try and get better in terms of understanding what are the best types of programs to have, the components to have in them, so that you can have that stronger relationship between work and personal life, so that the employee feels like they are getting the most from their benefits packages.
Absolutely. I mean, the big challenge that many employees face is to understand, how can I manage my life and achieve all the goals that I have for myself. But now with the remote work and also with the experience of COVID, many people have not been able to develop a structure that allows them to identify goals and pursue them and
Yep.
manage their life in an effective way. So they still look towards the company to help them in this process. So sometimes a simple task like, optimally designing how you should spend your time during the week, which is like the routine task that everybody has to do. But evidence shows that most people actually do not have a good way of structuring their week to get the most out of the time that they want to allocate to the company.
Right. Ivan, great to see you again. Thanks very much for your time.
It was a pleasure to talk to you again. See you next time.
Thank you. Iwan Barankay, Associate Professor of Business Economics and Public Policy, as well as Management here at the Wharton School. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.